The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the family's backyard in Ohio. It was one of those perfect September days when the summer heat had finally broken, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass through the quiet suburban neighborhood. Sophia hummed softly as she pulled wet sheets from the wicker basket, clipping them to the clothesline one by one. The rhythmic snap of fabric in the wind was soothing, almost meditative. "Mama, look," Emma's tiny voice called out. "I'm a butterfly." Sophia glanced over her shoulder and smiled at her 3-year-old daughter, who was spinning in circles with her arms outstretched, her pink sundress twirling around her chubby legs. Emma's dark curls bounced with each rotation, and her infectious giggle filled the air. It was a sound that never failed to warm Sophia's heart. "Beautiful," Sophia replied, reaching for another sheet. "Stay where I can see you, okay?" "Okay, Mama." Sophia turned back to her laundry, her hands working automatically as her mind wandered to the grocery list she needed to make for dinner. Maybe spaghetti tonight. Emma loved helping to stir the sauce, even though more ended up on her face than in the pot. The thought made Sophia smile. She reached for the last sheet, shaking it out before pinning it up. The entire process had taken maybe 5 minutes, 7 at most. She bent down to pick up the empty basket, then turned around. "Emma, time to go inside and—" The words died in her throat. The yard was empty. "Emma," Sophia's voice remained calm, though her heart rate picked up slightly. She walked toward the swing set where Emma had been playing. "Emma, baby, where are you?" Silence. "Emma, this isn't funny. Come out right now." Sophia's voice rose an octave. She checked behind the oak tree inside the playhouse under the porch steps. Nothing. Panic began to claw at her chest. She ran to the side gate, still latched from the inside. The back fence was too tall for Emma to climb. Sophia's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, simultaneously calling her husband and running to the front yard. "Emma's gone. I can't find her." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I was hanging laundry and she was right there and now." "Call 911. I'm leaving work now." His voice was tight with fear. "I'll be there in 10 minutes." Sophia's scream brought neighbors running from their homes. Within minutes, from 2 doors down was searching her garage. The Johnsons checked their backyard pool. Old Mister walked the street calling Emma's name, but there was no trace of the little girl in the pink sundress. The 911 dispatcher kept Sophia on the line, asking questions that felt like torture. What was Emma wearing? Any medical conditions? Could she have wandered into a neighbor's yard? Sophia answered through tears, her voice breaking with each word. 15 minutes felt like 15 hours. Detective Sarah Mitchell received the call while finishing paperwork at the police station. Missing child, 3 years old, vanished from her own backyard. Sarah's stomach tightened. She had an 8-year-old daughter herself. These cases were always the worst, especially in the critical first hours. "Come on, Max," she said to the German shepherd lying by her desk. The dog's ears perked up immediately, his brown eyes alert and focused. Max had been her partner for 4 years, trained in search and rescue with one of the best noses in the department. If anyone could find this little girl, he could. They arrived at the home just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The temperature was already dropping. It would be in the low 40s by nightfall. A 3-year-old alone in the cold, possibly scared and hiding, could develop hypothermia within hours. Sarah found Sophia surrounded by neighbors, her face streaked with tears, his arm around her shoulders. He'd arrived minutes before, and the anguish on both their faces was painful to witness. "Mrs. I'm Detective Mitchell. This is Max. He's going to help us find Emma." Sarah kept her voice steady and confident, though her own heart was pounding. "I need something of Emma's, a worn piece of clothing, a favorite blanket, something with her scent." Sophia stumbled into the house and returned with a small stuffed rabbit, worn from constant hugging. "She sleeps with this every night. She calls him Mr. Hoppy." Sarah held the toy to Max's nose. Such, Max, such, the German command for search. Max's entire body transformed. His nose went to the ground, working in rapid sniffs across the lawn. He moved in expanding circles, processing hundreds of scent particles invisible to human senses. Sarah watched him carefully, reading his body language like a language she'd spent years perfecting. Suddenly, Max's posture changed. His ears shot forward, his tail went rigid. He'd found something. The dog pulled toward the back of the property, past the swing set, straight to the fence line separating the yard from their neighbor's property. He stopped there, whining, pawing at the fence base. "She went this way," Sarah said, adrenaline surging through her veins. "Who lives next door?" Harold spoke up from the crowd. "Retired teacher, lives alone, keeps to himself mostly." Sarah and two uniformed officers moved quickly around the block to Harold's property. The house was a modest single-story with faded yellow siding and overgrown bushes. The front lawn needed mowing. Everything appeared quiet, almost too quiet. "Mr. Police, we're searching for a missing child," Sarah called out, knocking firmly on the door. Max pulled toward the side yard, his urgency increasing. Sarah followed, her hand instinctively moving to her service weapon. The yard was cluttered with old gardening equipment and ceramic pots. At the back sat a weathered wooden shed, its door slightly ajar. Max didn't wait. He bounded forward, nose working frantically. Sarah's flashlight beam cut through the shed's dim interior, illuminating paint cans, old tools, cobwebs, and then a flash of pink fabric. "Emma!" Behind a stack of paint cans pressed into the corner sat the tiniest figure Sarah had ever seen look so terrified. Emma's dark eyes were wide, tear-stained cheeks smudged with dirt. She wasn't making a sound. "Oh, sweetheart," Sarah breathed, holstering her weapon and approaching slowly. "It's okay, you're safe now. I'm going to take you home to Mommy." But Emma didn't move. She stared past Sarah, focused entirely on Max. The dog approached gently, his training taking over, and Emma's small hand reached out to touch his fur. That's when Sarah noticed the scratch marks on the inside of the door handle. Fresh scratches, at 3 feet high, exactly Emma's height. This wasn't a case of a wandering toddler. Someone had locked this child inside. Detective Sarah Mitchell's training kicked in immediately. She pressed the button on her radio, keeping her voice calm and controlled despite the alarm bells screaming in her mind. "I need CSI to 447 Drive, the property, possible crime scene, and get an ambulance here for the child." Emma remained frozen in the corner of the shed, her tiny fingers now clutching Max's fur like a lifeline. The German shepherd sat perfectly still, his warm brown eyes fixed on the frightened toddler. Sarah could see the child trembling, her pink sundress dirty and torn at the hem. "Emma, sweetie, your mommy is looking for you," Sarah said softly, crouching down to the child's level but maintaining distance. She'd worked enough trauma cases to know not to rush a frightened child. "She's been so worried. Would you like Max to walk you home?" At the mention of going home, Emma's grip on Max's fur tightened, but she gave the smallest nod. Sarah carefully reached out her hand, and Emma took it with her free hand, the other still buried in Max's thick coat. Together, they emerged from the shed into the fatting daylight. That's when Harold appeared in his back doorway. He was a thin man in his early 60s, with wire-rimmed glasses and gray hair combed neatly to the side. He wore khaki pants and a blue cardigan over a white shirt. He looked like everyone's harmless grandfather. But Sarah noticed details others might miss. The way his eyes darted from Emma to the shed and back, the slight tremor in his hands as he gripped the doorframe, the thin sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cooling temperature. "Oh my goodness," Harold exclaimed, his voice quavering. "Is that the child? I heard all the commotion but had no idea." He stepped forward, and Emma suddenly shrieked, a sound so primal and terrified that it made Sarah's blood run cold. "Mister, please stay where you are," Sarah commanded, positioning herself between him and Emma. Max's body tensed, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Dogs always knew. "I don't understand," Harold said, his hands raised in a gesture of innocence. "I've been inside all afternoon watching my programs. I had no idea anyone was in my shed. The door doesn't lock properly. It must have swung shut on the poor thing. She must have wandered over from next door." "When did you last go into your shed, mister?" Sarah asked, studying his face carefully. "Oh, not for days, maybe a week. I'm not much for yard work anymore. My arthritis, you know." He flexed his fingers demonstratively. Sarah's partner, officer no relation to Emma's family, had arrived and was now photographing the shed door. "Detective, you need to see this," he called out. The scratch marks on the inside weren't the only evidence. The door had a simple slide bolt lock on the outside, currently in the open position but showing fresh scraping marks where it had recently been engaged. The wood around it was weathered gray, but the scratches in the metal showed bright silver underneath. Recent. Very recent. "Mister, I'm going to need you to remain on your property while we conduct our investigation," Sarah said. "Officer Martinez will stay with you." "Investigation? But I told you I didn't even know she was there." Harold's voice rose slightly, his folksy demeanor cracking just a bit. "Standard procedure, sir. A child was found locked in your shed. We need to document everything." As EMTs checked Emma over, Sarah noticed the child still wouldn't speak. Not to the paramedics, not even when her mother came running around the corner, sobbing with relief. Sophia scooped Emma into her arms, covering her face with kisses, but Emma remained eerily silent, her eyes vacant. "She won't talk," Sophia cried. "Emma, baby, say something, please." Emma's gaze found Max, still standing nearby. The dog moved closer, and Emma reached out one small hand to touch his head again. At the hospital, Doctor completed her physical examination while Sophia and hovered anxiously nearby. "No signs of sexual assault," the doctor said quietly, and both parents exhaled in relief. "No major injuries. Some dehydration, minor scrapes on her hands and knees, but I'm concerned about her psychological state. She hasn't spoken a single word since arrival." "Is this normal?" asked, his voice hoarse. "After something traumatic?" "It can be," Doctor explained. "Selective mutism following trauma is a defense mechanism. Her mind is protecting her from having to talk about something frightening. I'm recommending a child psychologist evaluation." Dr. Rachel arrived within the hour. She was in her mid-40s with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor that immediately put parents at ease. She'd worked with traumatized children for 15 years and had seen cases that would haunt most people for life. But something about Emma's silence felt different. "Let me spend some time with her alone," Doctor suggested. "Sometimes children feel pressured to perform for their parents to be okay. She might open up without that pressure." For 30 minutes, Doctor tried everything: dolls, drawings, picture books, gentle questions. Emma sat on the hospital bed, staring at her hands, occasionally looking at the door. She seemed to be waiting for something. "Do you want to see someone, Emma?" Doctor asked. "Your brother, your daddy?" Emma shook her head. "A friend." "Nothing." Sarah Mitchell appeared in the doorway with Max. She'd come to update the family on the investigation. The moment Emma saw the German Shepherd, her entire body language changed. She sat up straight, her eyes brightened, and she reached both arms toward the dog. "May I?" Sarah asked Doctor, who nodded immediately, recognizing the breakthrough. Max approached the bed, and Emma wrapped her arms around his neck. Then, so softly that Sarah almost missed it, Emma whispered something into Max's fur. "What did she say?" Sophia gasped. Sarah moved closer, crouching beside the bed. "Emma, can you tell Max again? We're listening." Emma's small voice was barely audible, but the words were clear enough to make everyone in the room freeze. "The man with the candy knew my name." Sarah felt ice flood her veins. Harold had said he didn't know Emma was in the shed, that she must have wandered in accidentally. But Emma just said someone called her by name, someone who offered her candy. This wasn't a case of a lost child finding shelter in an unlocked shed. This was luring, this was premeditated, this was attempted kidnapping. Doctor quickly pulled out her phone and started recording. "Emma, you're being so brave. Can you tell Max more about the man?" Emma buried her face deeper into Max's fur, and for the next 20 minutes she spoke only to the dog. Each word was a dagger to Sophia's heart. The man called her over the fence. He said he had puppies, baby puppies, in his shed that needed a little girl to play with them. He knew her name. He knew she loved pink. He promised she could take a puppy home if she came to see them. When Emma went into the shed, there were no puppies, just darkness. The door closed. She heard the scraping sound of the lock. She called for her mama. The man's voice came through the wood. "Special girls don't cry. Be quiet and I'll come back when it gets dark. Then we'll go see your new home." Sarah's jaw clenched. Harold was planning to return after dark to take Emma somewhere else. If Max hadn't found her when he did, if the search had taken even an hour longer, Emma would have vanished completely. And something told Sarah this wasn't Harold's first time. Dr. Rachel had witnessed many breakthrough moments in her career, but watching 3-year-old Emma communicate exclusively with a police dog was unprecedented. She adjusted the camera angle on her tablet, ensuring every word was captured. This recording could be crucial evidence, if they could ever get it admitted in court. "Emma, sweetheart, can you tell Max what the man looked like?" Doctor asked gently, keeping her voice soft and non-threatening. Emma's small fingers traced patterns in Max's fur. The German Shepherd remained perfectly still, as if he understood the gravity of his role. "He had glasses," Emma whispered to the dog's ear, "like Grandpa's glasses, and his shirt was blue, really, really blue." Sophia stood outside the hospital room window, her hand pressed against the glass, tears streaming down her face. Held her, his own eyes red and swollen. They could hear everything through the intercom doctor had set up, and each word from their daughter's mouth broke them further. Detective Sarah Mitchell stood beside them, her notebook filling with details. Blue shirt, glasses. Harold had been wearing exactly that when she'd encountered him, but she needed more, much more, to build a case that would hold up. "Max is such a good listener," Doctor encouraged. "Can you tell him anything else about the shed? What did you see inside?" Emma's voice became even smaller. "Paint cans, green ones, and it smelled yucky, like when Daddy cleans the garage." Her bottom lip trembled. "I wanted Mama. I called and called, but the man said special girls are quiet. He said he picked me because I was the prettiest and the nicest." Sarah's pen pressed harder into her notebook. "He picked me," past tense. As if this had been planned, thought out, deliberate. She excused herself and stepped into the hallway, dialing the station. "I need a full warrant for Harold's property, house, shed, vehicles, everything," she told her captain. "And run his name through CAP. Check for any similar cases, any history with children, anything at all." "You think this goes deeper?" Captain asked. "I know it does. 3-year-olds don't just wander into sheds and get locked inside by accident. This was calculated." While Emma continued her heartbreaking conversation with Max, describing how she scratched at the door until her fingers hurt, how the dark scared her, how she sang "Twinkle, Twinkle" to herself to be brave, the forensic team was descending on Harold's property. CSI technician Jennifer Park entered the shed first, her trained eyes scanning every surface. She found what Sarah suspected would be there: fresh juice boxes hidden behind the paint cans. Apple juice, Emma's favorite according to her mother. The boxes were the same brand Sophia bought at the grocery store. One was empty, a small straw still inserted. "He prepared this," Jennifer muttered to her partner. "This wasn't opportunistic. He stocked this shed for her." Outside, Officer Martinez kept Harold seated on his porch, though the man insisted repeatedly he had nothing to do with anything. "I'm a retired teacher," Harold said, his voice shaking with what could have been fear or fury. Martinez couldn't tell which. "I spent 30 years educating children. I would never harm one. This is a terrible misunderstanding." "Then you won't mind us looking around," Martinez replied coolly. "I want my lawyer." Those 4 words changed everything. Innocent people rarely demanded lawyers before even being accused of a crime. Judge Williams signed the search warrant at 8:47 p.m. By 9:15, Sarah Mitchell was walking through Harold's living room with 6 other officers. The house was neat, almost obsessively so. Furniture from the 1990s, outdated but clean, lined with teaching textbooks and classic literature. Everything looked completely normal. Too normal. Sarah had learned in her 15 years as a detective that predators often hid in plain sight. They were coaches, teachers, neighbors, family friends, people who were supposed to be trustworthy. The monster rarely looked like a monster. "Detective," officer called from the hallway, "you need to see this." The bedroom closet appeared ordinary at first glance. Shirts arranged by color, shoes lined up perfectly. But had noticed something. The closet was shorter than it should be, given the room's dimensions. He'd knocked on the back wall and heard a hollow echo. It took 10 minutes to find the hidden latch disguised as a coat hook. The false wall swung open, revealing a narrow space that led to stairs descending into darkness. Sarah's flashlight beam cut through the shadows as she descended into Harold's basement. The smell hit her first, musty, closed off like a tomb. Then her light found the walls. Photographs, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Children at playgrounds, children walking home from school, children in their front yards, all of them young, between ages 2 and 5, all of them photographed from a distance, clearly taken without knowledge or consent. Some photos had dates written on the back, spanning 30 years. "Oh my God," breathed behind her. But the photographs were just the beginning. Sarah's light found a workbench covered in notebooks, journals filled with cramped handwriting. She picked up the nearest one with gloved hands and began to read. Subject displays consistent routine. Leaves for school 8:15 a.m. Returns 3:30 p.m. Mother works from home. Father travels. Opportunity window, Tuesday afternoons, mother's conference calls 2:04 p.m. Page after page of surveillance notes. Different children, different addresses, different states. Jennifer Park was photographing everything when she found the box. A cardboard box sealed with packing tape, hidden under the workbench. Inside were items that made her stomach turn. A small pink backpack, a blue tennis shoe sized for a toddler, a red hair ribbon, a toy truck. Each item was labeled with a name and date. Jennifer Marks 1994 Scranton, PA. Tommy 1998 Arbor, MI. Sarah felt her hands begin to shake. She knew those names. Every detective knew those names. They were cold cases, missing children who vanished without a trace. Cases that went nowhere, families that never got closure, files that gathered dust in evidence rooms across the country. And here was their answer, hidden in a basement in Ohio. Harold wasn't just a predator. He was a serial predator who'd been operating for 3 decades, moving from state to state, leaving devastation in his wake. Emma wasn't a random victim. She was next on a list that stretched back further than anyone had imagined. Sarah climbed the stairs, her legs feeling like lead. Officer Martinez was still with Harold on the porch. The older man looked up as Sarah emerged, and for just a moment his mask slipped. She saw cold calculation in those eyes, decades of practiced deception, and something else, fury that he'd finally been caught. "Harold, you're under arrest," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. "You have the right to remain silent." As Martinez handcuffed him, Harold's facade crumbled completely. "She was supposed to be easy," he hissed. "I watched her for weeks. I knew her schedule. I knew her mother hung laundry every Thursday. 7 minutes, that's all I needed. But that damn dog. His confession came pouring out, and Martinez's body camera captured every word. Back at the hospital, Emma had finally fallen asleep, her small hand still resting on Max's fur. The dog hadn't moved in hours, standing vigil over the child who'd trusted him with her darkest secrets. Doctor looked at the sleeping girl and felt a chill run down her spine. Emma was alive because of minutes, mere minutes of difference in timing. If Sarah and Max had arrived even 30 minutes later, after dark as Harold planned, Emma would have become another name in his collection. Another child who never came home. FBI Special Agent Torres arrived in at 6:30 the following morning. He'd driven through the night from the Cincinnati field office after receiving the call about Harold's arrest. Had spent 12 years working crimes against children, and he'd learned to compartmentalize the horror. But some cases still got through his defenses. This was shaping up to be one of them. Detective Sarah Mitchell met him at the property, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. She'd been up all night coordinating the investigation, and the weight of what they'd discovered sat heavy on her shoulders. "How many?" asked quietly as they stood in Harold's driveway. "We're still cataloging," Sarah replied, her voice hoarse. "At least 40 children photographed. 2 confirmed connections to cold cases, Jennifer Marks and Tommy, but we think there are more, many more." They descended into the basement together. In the harsh glare of the portable floodlights the forensic team had set up, the space looked even more sinister than it had the night before. The walls were now marked with numbered evidence tags, each one representing another piece of Harold's secret life. Pulled on latex gloves and carefully opened one of the journals Jennifer Park had preserved in evidence bags. The handwriting was methodical, almost clinical, the observations of someone who viewed children as specimens rather than human beings. December 3, 1994 subject shows pattern consistency. Walks same route from kindergarten. Mother trusts neighborhood safety. Window of opportunity expands during winter months. Earlier darkness provides cover. "This is Jennifer Marks," said, recognizing the date. He'd been a rookie agent when 5-year-old Jennifer vanished from a Scranton playground. The case had haunted the Bureau for decades. Her parents had died never knowing what happened to their daughter, their hearts broken by unanswered questions. He turned pages, his jaw tightening with each entry. Harold documented everything with the precision of a scientist: weather conditions, traffic patterns, parent work schedules, backup plans if something went wrong. He'd studied each child for months before making his move. "Here's Tommy," Sarah said, pointing to another journal from 1998. 3 years old, disappeared from outside his family's restaurant in Arbor. His mother turned her back for 2 minutes to grab a delivery. Witnesses said they saw a gray sedan, but nobody got the plates. Photographed every page. Owned a gray Accord in 1998. I checked the DMV records this morning. The evidence kept mounting. Forensic accountant Detective Shaw was upstairs going through Harold's financial records, and what he'd found added another layer to the investigation. Harold had moved 11 times in 30 years, always after a child went missing in his area, always to a new state, always to quiet suburban neighborhoods where people trusted their neighbors. "He's been running a pattern," explained, spreading maps across Harold's kitchen table. "Look, Scranton 1994, Arbor 1998, Louisville 2002, Phoenix 2007, Portland 2011. Each time within 6 months of a disappearance, he relocates. New teaching job, new identity essentially, new hunting ground." "How did nobody connect this?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Different jurisdictions, different states, different databases that didn't talk to each other effectively in the 90s and early 2000s. Harold had exploited the gaps in the system. Was studying the box of trophies, the items Harold had kept from his victims. Each piece was carefully preserved, labeled, stored like cherished memories. The sight made stomach turn. These weren't objects to Harold, they were souvenirs of his conquests. "We need to run DNA on everything," said. "Match it to the cold cases. These families deserve answers." Back at the hospital, Emma was awake but still wouldn't speak to anyone except Max. Dr. Rachel had set up a more formal interview room, still child-friendly, with soft lighting and toys, but equipped with proper recording equipment. The district attorney's office needed to build a case, and Emma was their only living witness to Harold's methods. And Sophia watched through one-way glass as their daughter sat on a cushioned mat with Max beside her. Doctor had brought in a child forensic interviewer, Detective Lisa Park, who specialized in getting accurate information from young witnesses without leading or traumatizing them further. "Hi, Emma," Lisa said warmly, sitting cross-legged on the mat. "I see you have your friend Max with you. He's a very good dog." Emma nodded, her small hand buried in Max's fur. "Emma, I need to ask you some questions about what happened yesterday. You don't have to answer me. You can tell Max and I'll listen. Does that sound okay?" Another small nod. "Can you tell Max how you knew to go to Mistress Yard?" Emma leaned close to Max's ear. "He called my name over the fence. He said, 'Emma, Emma, come see the puppies.' He knew my name." Lisa's heart sank. This confirmed premeditation. Harold had been watching Emma long enough to learn her name, her routines, her interests. "What else did the man say to you?" "He said the puppies needed me. He said they were lonely and scared. He said I was special because I was so good with animals." Emma's voice wavered. "He said Mr. Hoppy could come too. He knew about Mr. Hoppy." Sophia gasped from behind the glass. Mr. Hoppy, Emma's stuffed rabbit, never left the house except for doctor appointments. The only way Harold could have known about him was if he'd been watching through their windows. The interview continued for 45 minutes, with Emma revealing details that painted a picture of a predator who had studied her meticulously. Harold knew what time her father left for work. He knew her mother hung laundry every Thursday at 4:30. He knew Emma played with a red ball and liked to catch butterflies. He knew everything. "Emma, you're being so brave," Lisa said gently. "One more question. When the man locked the door, what did he say exactly?" Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she whispered to Max. "He said, 'Special girls don't tell. I picked you because you're perfect. When it gets dark, I'll take you to your new home where you'll meet other special girls who've been waiting for you.'" The room went silent. Other special girls who'd been waiting. Who'd been listening via radio felt his blood run cold. This confirmed what he'd feared. Harold wasn't just taking these children for a few hours. He had a destination, a place where he kept them. Somewhere these children were imprisoned, alone, waiting for rescue that might never come. "We need to find that location," said urgently to Sarah. "If there are other victims still alive." "I'm on it," Sarah interrupted, already dialing the forensic team. "Check his GPS history, toll records, everything. If he has a secondary location, we'll find it." Back at the county jail, Harold sat in an interrogation room with his court-appointed attorney, Gregory, a seasoned defense lawyer known for getting clients off on technicalities. "Don't say anything else," advised. "That confession last night, we'll argue it was coerced, made under duress without proper Miranda warnings." Harold smiled coldly. "It doesn't matter what I said. They can't prove anything. All they have are old photographs and a 3-year-old's imagination. No jury will convict based on fairy tales told to a dog." Nodded slowly. He'd already identified their defense strategy. Emma was 3 years old. Young children were notoriously unreliable witnesses, easily confused, highly suggestible, prone to fantasy. No matter what evidence the police had found, their entire case hinged on the testimony of a toddler who would barely be able to understand what a courtroom was, let alone withstand cross-examination. "They'll never let her testify," said confidently. "The judge will rule her incompetent as a witness. Without her testimony linking you to the actual kidnapping attempt, all they have is circumstantial evidence. We can explain away the photographs as a teacher's interest in child development, the journals as creative writing, the items in the basement as purchased at estate sales. Harold's smile widened. He'd been so careful for so long. One mistake, leaving that shed door unsecured, wouldn't be his downfall. The law would protect him just as it always had. A child's word against his. He liked those odds. But neither Harold nor his attorney knew what was happening back at the courthouse, where prosecutor was researching a legal precedent that could change everything. Prosecutor sat in her office at 2:00 a.m., surrounded by law books, case files, and cold coffee. Her desk lamp cast harsh shadows across pages of legal precedent she'd been studying for 16 hours straight. Somewhere in this mountain of jurisprudence, there had to be a way to make Emma's testimony admissible in court. Was 52 years old, a mother of 3, and had been prosecuting criminals for 26 years. She'd won cases that seemed impossible, put away murderers and rapists who thought they were untouchable. But this case terrified her in a way nothing else had. If she couldn't find a legal path forward, Harold would walk free, and more children would disappear. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sarah Mitchell found his GPS history, multiple trips to rural property in Kentucky, sending teams at dawn. Pray we find them alive. Closed her eyes. Other special girls who'd been waiting. Emma's words echoed in her mind, spurring her forward. She pulled up another case file on her computer. State v. 1996. 5-year-old witness deemed incompetent to testify due to inability to distinguish truth from fantasy. People v. Martinez. 2003. 4-year-old's testimony excluded after failing preliminary examination. Commonwealth v. Burke. 2011. 6-year-old statements ruled inadmissible hearsay. The pattern was clear and discouraging. Courts had consistently ruled that children under 5 were unreliable witnesses. They couldn't understand the oath to tell the truth. They couldn't distinguish between reality and imagination. They were easily influenced by leading questions. Their memories were malleable. Their testimony was considered inherently suspect. And Emma was only 3 years old. Had already received the preliminary brief from Harold's defense attorney, Gregory. She'd worked against before. He was ruthless, brilliant, and completely amoral. His strategy was obvious. Attack Emma's credibility, portray Harold as a harmless retiree being persecuted based on circumstantial evidence and a toddler's confused recollections. His motion to exclude Emma's testimony was 43 pages of carefully constructed legal argumentation. He cited dozens of cases where young children's testimony had been deemed inadmissible. He argued that allowing a 3-year-old to testify would violate Harold's right to a fair trial. He claimed that Emma's exclusive communication with a dog proved she was living in a fantasy world, unable to distinguish between reality and make-believe. The brief's conclusion was devastating. Your Honor, we are asked to believe that a 3-year-old child, barely capable of forming complete sentences, can provide reliable testimony that will potentially imprison an innocent man for life. This court cannot, in good conscience, allow such a travesty of justice. Without the child's testimony, the prosecution has no case. The physical evidence can be explained away as coincidental. My client's presence in his own shed is not a crime. The state cannot prove beyond reasonable doubt that Mr. committed any criminal act. Hated that was right about one thing. Without Emma's testimony, her case was weak. Yes, they had the photographs, the journals, the evidence from the cold cases. But Harold's lawyers would argue everything circumstantially. A teacher interested in child development, a writer researching a novel, items purchased at estate sales. Without Emma's direct testimony linking Harold to the luring and imprisonment, a jury might have reasonable doubt. Her computer pinged. An email from Dr. Rachel with the subject line, Emma's psychological evaluation urgent. Open the document and read carefully. Doctor had spent 3 days with Emma, conducting comprehensive assessments. The findings were remarkable. Despite her young age, Emma displays exceptional memory recall for traumatic events. Her accounts remain consistent across multiple interviews, a key indicator of truthfulness in children. Her exclusive communication with the K-9 officer Max is not a sign of fantasy or delusion, but rather a trauma response known as selective mutism. The dog represents safety and non-judgment to her. Critically, Emma can distinguish between truth and lies, understands consequences, and demonstrates cognitive abilities advanced for her age. Doctor's conclusion offered a glimmer of hope. With appropriate accommodations, specifically the presence of her support animal, Emma could potentially provide reliable testimony. However, the stress of a traditional courtroom setting could be psychologically damaging and may cause her to regress further into selective mutism. Sat back in her chair, her mind racing. Appropriate accommodations. Support animal. The words triggered a memory from a conference she'd attended 2 years ago about trauma-informed justice. She searched her files frantically until she found it. A presentation on the Americans with Disabilities Act and its applications in courtroom settings. The ADA required reasonable accommodations for witnesses with disabilities, including PTSD and anxiety disorders. Service animals had been allowed in courtrooms for witnesses with various conditions. But could selective mutism qualify? Could a police K-9 be designated as a support animal? Had any court in the country ever allowed such an arrangement for a child witness? Spent the next 4 hours researching. She found cases where therapy dogs had been present during victim testimony in domestic violence cases. Instances where comfort animals helped adult witnesses with PTSD get through difficult testimony. A case in California where a facility dog sat with a 10-year-old abuse victim during trial. But nothing involving a 3-year-old. Nothing involving a police K-9. Nothing quite like what she was considering. At 6:00 a.m. called her boss, District Attorney Robert. I know it's early, but I have an idea. It's unconventional, it's never been done before, but it might be our only shot. An hour later, she was presenting her case to the DA and his senior staff. Emma can testify, argued, her voice hoarse but determined. But only with Max present. I'm going to file a motion requesting that the K-9 officer be designated as Emma's support animal under the ADA. With the dog beside her, she can speak. Without him, she shuts down completely. The science supports it, the psychology supports it, and legally, I believe we can make the argument. We'll fight this tooth and nail, Robert warned. He'll call it a circus, say you're trying to manipulate the jury's emotions by having a cute dog in the courtroom. Let him, shot back. What's the alternative? Let walk free. Let those families never get justice. There are potentially other victims still alive somewhere, and Emma is the only person who can put Harold away long enough for us to find them. The FBI had called at 5:30 a.m. They'd found Harold's Kentucky property, an isolated cabin on 40 acres of heavily wooded land. They'd found evidence that children had been there, small clothes, toys, a makeshift classroom in the basement, but no bodies, no living victims. Wherever Harold had taken Jennifer Marks and Tommy and the others, it wasn't there. He had another location, maybe several, and he wasn't talking. Emma was their only hope of putting Harold away, while investigators continued searching for the other victims. Draft the motion, Robert finally said, but understand what you're doing. If you succeed, you'll set a precedent that will affect courtrooms across the country. If you fail, we lose everything and walks. Returned to her office and began typing. The motion was titled, Prosecutor's Emergency Motion to Permit Support Animal Accommodation for Child Witness under the Americans with Disabilities Act and Ohio Rules of Evidence. She worked through the day, citing medical evidence, psychological studies, ADA provisions, and the fundamental principle that justice should be accessible to all, even traumatized 3-year-olds who could only speak to a dog. At 4:00 p.m., she filed the motion with the court. By 4:30 p.m., Gregory had filed his opposition, a scathing 30-page brief calling his motion a transparent attempt to manipulate the jury through emotional theater, and an unprecedented violation of established legal procedure that threatens the integrity of our justice system. Judge Maria, a stern 60-year-old with a reputation for fairness and careful consideration, now held Emma's fate and Harold in her hands. She scheduled an emergency hearing for the following Monday. Had 4 days to prepare for the most important argument of her career. 4 days to convince a judge to allow something that had never been done before in American legal history. 4 days to save Emma's voice and potentially save the lives of children who might still be waiting in the darkness, wondering if anyone would ever find them. Judge Maria had been on the bench for 18 years. She'd presided over murder trials, corruption cases, and complex civil litigation that made national headlines. She prided herself on following the law precisely, without letting emotion cloud her judgment. But as she sat in her chambers reading prosecutors' motion, she felt the weight of this decision pressing down on her like nothing before. Her law clerk, 26-year-old Jason Park, stood nervously by her desk. "Your Honor, the media is already camping outside the courthouse. CNN, NBC, Fox News, everyone wants to cover this hearing." Maria sighed, removing her reading glasses. "Of course they do. It's not every day someone asks to bring a police dog into a courtroom as a support animal for a 3-year-old witness." "What are you thinking?" Jason asked carefully. He'd worked for Judge long enough to know she valued honest discussion. "I'm thinking this case is going to haunt me regardless of what I decide." Maria stood and walked to her window, looking down at the gathering media trucks. "If I allow it, I set a precedent that could fundamentally change how we handle child witnesses. Defense attorneys across the country will argue I've opened the door to emotional manipulation in courtrooms. If I deny it, a monster potentially walks free, and I've told a traumatized child that the law doesn't care about her voice." She turned back to her desk, picking up the psychological evaluation Dr. Rachel had submitted. "But this isn't really about legal precedent, is it? It's about a 3-year-old girl who can only speak when a dog is present. It's about whether our justice system can adapt to accommodate the most vulnerable among us." Monday morning arrived with unseasonable cold. Walked into the courthouse at 7:00 a.m., carrying 3 briefcases full of research, medical studies, and case law. She'd barely slept in 4 days, surviving on coffee and determination. Detective Sarah Mitchell met her in the hallway, Max at her side. The German Shepherd looked as calm as ever, but Sarah could feel the tension radiating through his leash. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked. "Terrified," admitted. "Everything hinges on the next 2 hours." The courtroom filled quickly, and Sophia sat in the front row, holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white. Behind them, Jennifer Mark's elderly sister had flown in from Pennsylvania. Tommy's brother sat 3 rows back, his face etched with hope and grief. Families of the other potential victims lined the gallery, people who'd waited decades for answers. Harold entered in an orange jumpsuit, his expression serene and confident. Gregory sat beside him, impeccably dressed in a navy suit, radiating the kind of courtroom authority that came from 30 years of winning cases. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, Judge entered. "All rise." Everyone stood and Maria took her seat, surveying the packed courtroom. "This is a hearing on the prosecution's emergency motion regarding witness accommodation. Ms., you have the floor." Stood, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged her notes. "Your Honor, this motion concerns Emma, a 3-year-old victim of attempted kidnapping who suffers from trauma-induced selective mutism. She can provide crucial testimony in this case, but only under specific conditions." She clicked a remote, and the courtroom monitors displayed doctor's evaluation. Dr. Rachel, a licensed child psychologist with 15 years of experience in trauma cases, has determined that Emma's selective mutism is directly caused by the traumatic events of October 3rd. Emma can speak, she does speak, but only when K9 Officer Max is present. The dog represents safety, non-judgment, and emotional security. Move to our next slide, showing excerpts from the ADA. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires reasonable accommodations for individuals with disabilities, including PTSD and severe anxiety disorders. Ohio rules of evidence allow for special procedures when questioning child witnesses. Your Honor, we're not asking for anything that violates mistress' rights. We're asking for an accommodation that allows a disabled witness to exercise her right to testify. Your Honor, interrupted, rising smoothly. This is absurd. The prosecution wants to bring a police dog, a trained law enforcement animal, into the courtroom and call it a support animal. This isn't about accommodation. It's about creating sympathy. The jury will see a frightened child clinging to a dog while pointing at my client, and rational deliberation will go out the window. Mr. began but continued. Furthermore, Your Honor, a 3-year-old cannot be a competent witness regardless of whether there's a dog present. Children this young lack the cognitive development to distinguish truth from fantasy, cannot understand the oath to tell the truth, and are highly susceptible to suggestion. The prosecution knows their case is weak, so they're resorting to emotional theater. Judge held up her hand. Mr. You'll have your turn. Ms. Continue. Took a deep breath. Your Honor, I've submitted affidavits from 3 child development experts. All confirm that while children Emma's age are often unreliable witnesses, Emma is exceptional. Her memory is consistent across multiple interviews. She can distinguish truth from lies. She understands consequences. With appropriate accommodation, Max's presence, she can provide reliable testimony. She pulled up video footage on the monitor. This is Emma's interview with forensic specialist Detective Lisa Park. Watch Emma's consistency, her specific details, her emotional responses. This isn't fantasy. This is a child recounting real trauma. The courtroom watched in silence as Emma whispered to Max, describing Harold calling her name, promising puppies, locking the shed door. Sophia began crying softly and pulled her clothes. When the video ended, continued. Your Honor, we have similar cases where courts allowed accommodations. State v. permitted a therapy dog during testimony from an adult sexual assault victim. People v. allowed a comfort animal for a witness with severe PTSD. Commonwealth v. George approved a facility dog for a 10-year-old abuse survivor. None of those involved a 3-year-old, interjected. None involved a police K9, and none set the dangerous precedent this motion seeks. Judge leaned forward. Ms., I understand your argument about accommodation, but I'm concerned about Mr.'s point regarding the jury. How do we ensure the dog's presence doesn't unduly influence their verdict? Max will wear a vest clearly marking him as a support animal, not in his police capacity, explained. We can instruct the jury that his presence is purely for Emma's medical accommodation and should not factor into their deliberations. Additionally, we can have doctor present to monitor Emma's well-being and intervene if necessary. Stood again. Your Honor, these safeguards are meaningless. The moment that child walks in with a dog clutching its fur, the jury's objectivity is compromised. My client deserves a fair trial, not a sympathy parade designed to distract from the prosecution's lack of actual evidence. Lack of evidence. His voice rose with controlled anger. We have surveillance journals spanning 30 years. We have photographs of dozens of children. We have physical evidence linking your client to 2 cold case kidnappings. We have his own confession, recorded on body camera, admitting he planned to take Emma after dark. The only thing we lack is a witness who can put the jury in that shed with Emma, who can make them understand the calculation and malice behind your client's actions. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge gavelled for order. "Your Honor," said quietly, "Harold is counting on the law protecting him by silencing his victim. He's counting on Emma being too young, too traumatized, too voiceless to stand against him. I'm asking this court to evolve, to recognize that justice should be accessible even to our smallest, most vulnerable citizens. Emma has a voice. She deserves to be heard." Shook his head. What Ms. is really asking is for this court to abandon established legal principles because of emotional appeal. That's not justice. That's mob rule with better window dressing. Judge sat back, her expression unreadable. "I'll take this under advisement. Court is adjourned." For 3 days, Maria barely left her chambers. She read every case cited, every psychological study, every legal precedent. She consulted with judges across the country, spoke with child welfare experts, and reviewed the ADA provisions until she could recite them in her sleep. Jason brought her coffee on the third night. "The press is going crazy. They're calling this the dog witness case. Some legal experts say you'll be making history if you allow it. Others say you'll be destroying the integrity of the justice system." Maria smiled grimly. No pressure then. On Thursday morning, she called both attorneys into her chambers and sat across from each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Judge looked at them both, her decision made. "I've reached my ruling." Judge Maria set a folder on her desk and looked at both attorneys with the gravity of someone who understood she was about to alter legal history. The silence in her chambers felt suffocating. "I've spent 3 days considering this motion from every conceivable angle," she began, her voice measured and deliberate. "I've consulted with colleagues, reviewed decades of case law, and wrestled with the implications of my decision. This isn't about emotions or sympathy. It's about whether our justice system can fulfill its fundamental purpose, seeking truth, while accommodating those who need help accessing it." Held her breath. Gregory's jaw was set, ready to object to whatever came next. "After careful consideration," Judge continued, "I'm granting the prosecution's motion with specific conditions." Felt tears spring to her eyes, but she remained professional, silent. Stood immediately. "Your Honor, I must respectfully—" "Sit down, mister," Judge said firmly. "You'll have your opportunity to appeal. Let me explain my reasoning." She opened the folder before her. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires reasonable accommodations for individuals with disabilities to participate in legal proceedings. Doctor's evaluation clearly establishes that Emma suffers from trauma-induced selective mutism, a recognized psychological condition. Without accommodation, she cannot testify. With K-9 Officer Max present, she can. His face reddened, but he remained seated. "However," the judge continued, "I share Mister's concerns about potential prejudice. Therefore, I'm imposing strict conditions. First, Max will wear a clearly marked vest identifying him as a support animal, not in his law enforcement capacity. Second, the jury will receive explicit instructions that Max's presence is solely for medical accommodation and must not influence their verdict. Third, Doctor will be present throughout Emma's testimony to monitor her psychological state. Fourth, Emma will testify from a child-friendly chair positioned beside Max, not from the traditional witness stand. And fifth, both attorneys will submit questions in advance, which I will review to ensure they're age-appropriate and non-leading." She closed the folder and looked directly at Mr. "Your client is entitled to a fair trial, but Emma is entitled to her voice. I believe we can provide both. This court will reconvene Monday morning for jury selection. We're making history, let's make it responsibly." The media frenzy that followed was unprecedented. Legal scholars debated on national television. Some called Judge a pioneer in trauma-informed justice. Others accused her of judicial activism that would undermine trials nationwide. Justice for Emma trended on social media, while defense attorney organizations issued statements warning of dangerous precedent. But had no time for the noise. She had 6 days to prepare a 3-year-old for the most important testimony of both their lives. Dr. Rachel created a careful preparation plan. "We can't rehearse her testimony. That could be construed as coaching," she explained to and Sarah Mitchell. "But we can familiarize her with the courtroom environment, help her understand what will happen, and practice feeling safe while strangers watch her." They transformed a conference room into a mock courtroom. Emma visited 3 times with Max, gradually getting comfortable with the space. Doctor used dolls to explain what a judge, lawyers, and jury were. Emma practiced sitting in the special chair they'd brought in, with Max lying beside her. "Will the bad man be there?" Emma asked Max during one session, her small voice trembling. Doctor answered gently, "Yes, but he can't hurt you. Max will be right beside you and your mama and daddy will be there too. You're safe, Emma, so safe." Struggled with the decision to allow Emma to testify. "She's so little," he told, his voice breaking. "What if this damages her more? What if she can't handle it?" "I won't force this," promised. "If Emma shows signs of serious distress, I'll stop. But Sophia, Emma needs closure too. She needs to know that telling the truth matters, that the bad man can't hurt her anymore. This could be part of her healing." Monday morning arrived cold and gray. The courthouse was surrounded by news crews, protesters holding signs reading, "Protect our children" and "Justice for Emma," and courthouse security working overtime to manage the crowds. Inside courtroom 4B, jury selection took 2 full days. Eustace challenges to eliminate anyone who seemed too sympathetic to children or emotional about the case. Looked for jurors who could handle difficult testimony while remaining objective. They finally seated 12 jurors and 2 alternates, 6 men, 6 women, ranging from a 23-year-old graduate student to a 68-year-old retired accountant. The trial began on Wednesday. His opening statement was powerful but restrained. "The evidence will show that Harold is a predator who has hunted children for 30 years. He's meticulous, patient, and calculated. On October 3rd, he nearly succeeded in claiming another victim, 3-year-old Emma, but Emma survived. And Emma can tell you in her own words exactly what Harold did." His opening was aggressive. "The prosecution will present circumstantial evidence, questionable interpretations of personal journals, and the confused recollections of a traumatized toddler. Yes, Emma had a frightening experience. But that doesn't mean my client caused it. Reasonable doubt exists everywhere in this case, and by the end of this trial, you'll see that Harold is innocent." Spent 3 days building her case methodically. She called forensic experts who about the evidence in Harold's basement. FBI agent tours explained the connections to cold cases. Jennifer Park detailed the fresh juice boxes in the shed, the scratch marks on the door, the timeline that matched Emma's disappearance. Each piece of evidence tightened the noose around Harold, but everyone knew the case hinged on what came next. Friday morning, Emma's testimony. Sophia dressed her daughter in a simple blue dress, braiding her hair with trembling fingers. "You're so brave," she whispered. So brave." Emma clutched Mr. Hoppy, her stuffed rabbit. "Max will be there." "Max will be right beside you the whole time," Sophia promised. The courtroom fell silent as Emma entered, her small hand holding Doctor's. Every eye was on the tiny figure in the blue dress, and several jurors visibly softened. Max walked calmly beside them, his training evident in every measured step. Judge spoke gently from the bench. "Good morning, Emma. Do you know why you're here today?" Emma nodded, her eyes finding Max as he lay down beside the special chair. "Emma, I need you to tell these people what happened. Can you do that?" "I can tell Max," Emma whispered. "That's perfect. You tell Max and we'll all listen." Approached slowly, keeping her distance to avoid overwhelming the child. "Hi, Emma. Thank you for being here. You're very brave." Emma's hand rested on Max's head, her fingers working through his fur. "Emma, can you tell Max about the day you went into Mr. Shed?" And so it began. For 45 minutes, Emma recounted her story in a soft, steady voice directed entirely at the German Shepherd. She described playing in her yard, hearing someone call her name, seeing Harold's face over the fence. She explained about the promised puppies, the walk to the shed, the darkness when the door closed. The jury sat transfixed. Several women wiped tears. The retired accountant gripped his armrest so tightly his knuckles turned white. Then Gregory rose for cross-examination. Judge had reviewed his questions, but she couldn't control his tone. "Emma," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you have a very good imagination, don't you? Do you like to make up stories?" Emma looked confused. "Sometimes I play pretend." "And sometimes you pretend things are real when they're not, right? Like when you pretend Mr. Hoppy can talk." "Objection," said, argumentative. "Sustained. Mister, keep your questions straightforward." "Tried again." "Emma, you were scared in that shed. When we're scared, sometimes we imagine things that aren't real. Are you sure you didn't imagine the man locking you in?" Emma's voice was crystal clear. "He locked the door. I heard the scrape." "But how do you know it was Mister? Maybe you just saw someone who looked like him." Emma turned and pointed directly at Harold, her small finger unwavering. "That's him. That's the bad man." The courtroom gasped. Harold's face paled, then flushed red. Pressed on, sensing he was losing. "Emma, how did you get out of the shed if the door was locked?" Emma looked back at Max, her voice barely audible. "The man said I was special. He said he picked me because I was the prettiest. He said he'd come back after dark to take me to see my new home. He said other special girls were waiting for me there." The silence was deafening. "Your Honor, I request a recess," began, but it was too late. Harold exploded from his seat. "She wasn't supposed to get out," he screamed. "I had everything planned. 30 years of planning, and that dog ruined everything." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Harold's face was contorted with rage, veins bulging in his neck as he lunged forward. 2 bailiffs grabbed him immediately, forcing him back into his chair. His outburst echoed off the walls. "That dog ruined everything. 30 years of perfect planning." Gregory grabbed his client's arm, hissing desperately, "Shut up. For God's sake, shut up." But Harold couldn't stop. 3 decades of control, of meticulous planning, of getting away with the unspeakable, all of it shattered in one moment of fury. "She was supposed to be easy. I watched her for weeks. I knew her mother's schedule, her father's routine. 7 minutes, that's all I needed. But that damned dog found her too fast." Judge slammed her gavel repeatedly. "Order, bailiffs, remove Mister from the courtroom." Emma had buried her face in Max's fur at the first shout, and Dr. Rachel immediately wrapped her arms around the child. "You're safe, Emma. You're safe. He can't hurt you." As bailiffs dragged Harold out, still screaming about his ruined plans, about the other children he'd successfully taken, about the cabin nobody would ever find, the jury sat in stunned silence. Several were openly crying. The retired accountant looked physically ill. Stood frozen, her mind racing. She hadn't expected this. Defense attorneys spent months coaching clients not to speak, not to react, to maintain composure no matter what. But Harold's arrogance, his decades of success, his fury at being outsmarted by a 3-year-old and a police dog, it had all come crashing out in a confession more damning than anything could have orchestrated. Sophia rushed forward, but Doctor held up a hand. "Give her a moment with Max. She needs to ground herself." Emma's small voice emerged from Max's fur. "Is the bad man gone?" "Yes, sweetheart," Doctor assured her. "He's gone. He can never hurt you again." Judge called a 30-minute recess. When court reconvened, Harold was back, handcuffed now, flanked by guards, with a piece of duct tape that might as well have been across his mouth given how vigorously was whispering to him. "Ms. Judge said wearily, do you have additional questions for this witness?" Looked at Emma, still holding Max, and shook her head. "No, Your Honor. I think the defense's cross-examination was quite conclusive." Stood, his face ashen. Your Honor, I move for a mistrial. My client's outburst was a full confession witnessed by 12 jurors, court staff, and recorded by court stenographer. Judge interrupted. Motion. Does the defense have any witnesses? Slumped, no, Your Honor. The closing arguments were almost anticlimactic. Was brief. You heard Harold confess in his own words. You saw the evidence of 30 years of predation. You listened to Emma, a 3-year-old child who survived because of timing, because of luck, because of a police dog's keen nose. How many others weren't so lucky? The evidence demands justice. Emma demands justice. Jennifer Marks and Tommy and all the others demand justice. His closing was desperate, grasping at technicalities that sounded hollow even to him. My client had an emotional reaction to being falsely accused. Words spoken in anger aren't the same as legal confession. You must consider reasonable doubt. But there was no reasonable doubt left. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. When they returned, the forewoman, a 42-year-old middle school teacher named Moore, stood with tears in her eyes. We find the defendant, Harold, guilty on all counts: attempted kidnapping, child endangerment, false imprisonment, and conspiracy related to the murders of Jennifer Marks and Tommy. Sophia's sob of relief filled the courtroom, held her as she shook. In the back row, Jennifer Marks's sister collapsed into her husband's arms. Tommy's brother covered his face, shoulders heaving. Harold showed no emotion. He stared straight ahead, his mask finally and completely shattered. The sentencing hearing came 2 weeks later. By then, FBI investigators had found more. Harold's financial records led them to a property in Montana he'd purchased under an alias. In a hidden underground bunker, they discovered remains. 6 children, all between ages 3 and 5, all missing for years from different states. DNA testing confirmed their identities, finally giving 6 families the closure they desperately sought. FBI agent tours at sentencing about each victim, their names, their stories, their families who never stopped hopping. Harold didn't just take lives, said, his voice thick with emotion. He stole futures, destroyed families, and left wounds that will never fully heal. Emma survived by minutes, maybe seconds. She represents every child who didn't make it. She's their voice now. Judge sentenced Harold to life in prison without possibility of parole. You preyed on the most innocent, the most vulnerable. You planned, stalked, and took children from families who trusted their neighborhoods. You showed no remorse, only anger at being caught. This court has no mercy for you, as you showed no mercy to your victims. Harold was led away in chains. He would die in prison, his name added to the list of monsters parents used to warn their children about dangers that really did exist. But Emma's story didn't end in that courtroom. Judge's ruling became known as Emma's Law. Within 18 months, 17 states adopted similar provisions allowing support animals for child witnesses in trauma cases. Legal scholars debated it in journals. Law schools taught it in evidence courses. It fundamentally changed how courts approached vulnerable witnesses. Emma began therapy with Dr., gradually expanding her ability to speak beyond just Max. 6 months after the trial, she spoke her first words to her mother since the trauma. "I love you, Mama." Sophia wept with joy. A year later, Emma started preschool. She still had nightmares sometimes, still needed extra support, but she was healing. She drew pictures of Max constantly, her hero, her protector, her friend who listened when no one else could. Max received the National Police Dog Association's Medal of Valor at a ceremony in Washington. D.C. Detective Sarah Mitchell stood proudly beside him as the medal was placed around his neck. "This dog saved a life," the presenter said. "But more than that, he gave a voiceless child the courage to speak. He's a hero in every sense of the word." Emma attended the ceremony with her parents. When Max approached afterward, she hugged him tightly and whispered in his ear, words only the dog heard, but Sarah saw Emma smile. A real, genuine, healing smile. The families of Harold's victims found different paths to peace. Some created foundations for missing children. Others became advocates for better cross-state crime databases. Jennifer Marks's sister started a support group for families of cold case victims. They'd waited decades for answers, and while the truth was painful, it was better than endless wondering. On the second anniversary of her rescue, Emma, now 5 years old and thriving in kindergarten, asked her parents if she could visit Max. Sarah arranged it, and Emma ran to the German Shepherd like greeting an old friend. "Thank you for listening," Emma told Max, her voice clear and strong. "Thank you for helping me be brave." Max's tail wagged, and for a moment Sarah could have sworn the dog understood every word. Emma grew up knowing she'd helped put a monster away. She'd given voice to children who no longer had voices. She'd changed the law, and she'd done it all because a police dog sat beside her and made her feel safe enough to speak the truth. In the years that followed, whenever young witnesses struggled to testify in difficult cases, lawyers remembered Emma's law. They remembered that justice should be accessible to everyone, even the smallest, most frightened among us. They remembered that sometimes the best way to help someone find their voice is to simply sit beside them and listen. And they remembered Max, the dog who understood that sometimes being a hero means just being present when someone needs you most. The end.